LaGuardia Airport, Gate 37B. People were lining up to board flights to San Francisco, but a strange sight brought the atmosphere to a standstill. "Ma'am, I need you to represent your ticket," the security guard said, her tone suspicious, her eyes scanning the ticket as if searching for a mistake. "Your ticket needs to be validated before you can board. You can't board now. Please step aside to make room for others." Elise Brooks, a prominent CEO in the tech industry, a black woman with a minimalist red suit and neatly combed hair, held up the ticket again, her eyes still calm, her expression unchanged, even as her heart shattered. The ticket clearly said 2A, first class, reserved for the most privileged customers. But Kara didn't look at it. Instead, she scanned Elise from head to toe, as if she couldn't believe someone like her could be sitting in first class. The scene around her seemed to stand still. A few passengers stood nearby, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and sympathy for the staff. Elise's eyes never left the ticket, but with each passing second, it felt like a million different gazes were focused on her. She opened her mouth, intending to explain, but before she could say anything, Mark, an airport security guard, stepped forward, his hands clasping her arms tightly, pulling her out of the crowd. Elise made no protest. She stood still, as if the price of her indifference had been decided long ago. But deep inside, she could feel the waves of anger from those who had gone before her, those who had been stripped of their rights, dragged away in shame and indifference. They were watching her, witnessing this scene anew. All of a sudden, everything fell silent, as if an invisible force had drained all life from the vast space of LaGuardia Airport. The remaining passengers, who had been waiting in line for a long time, suddenly became strangers in a space filled with confusion. The giant screen above suddenly went dark. Instead of showing flight information, it was now just a black mass like an invisible, threatening shadow, without any light reflecting life. The electronic instructions on the announcement board also stopped moving. For a few seconds, the air of the airport seemed to freeze. Everything was silent, as if it had stopped breathing. The entire airport was like a beehive without a hive. No one knew what was happening. Murmurs began to rise from everywhere, unanswered questions continuously popping into the air. What happened? System crash? A passenger stared blankly at the black screen, his voice like a broken mirror, worried but helpless. The others continued, each with their own questions, but no one had an answer. The loudspeakers had been blaring nonstop all day, but now everything was silent. All sound was cut off abruptly. A voice had just started to speak, but only a long beep was heard, and then silence. The air seemed to thicken, heavy, tense. The remaining passengers could only stand there, eyes searching for a reason, but there seemed to be nothing to explain. An eerie silence fell, as if the whole airport had suddenly lost its soul. Behind the check-in counters, airport employees stood in a daze, their eyes darting back and forth, staring at computer screens without a response. Even the boarding system, where one would normally see boarding passes scanned and accepted, seemed motionless, as if the world had stopped spinning. A strange feeling filled the vast space. All movement suddenly became broken. People looked at each other in confusion, and then people started talking, each making their own guesses. "The system really crashed? It must be," a rather old man spoke up, his voice slightly humorous, but there was an underlying worry. The man next to him just nodded slightly, looking around, not knowing what he could do in this situation. All eyes were on the airport staff, but none of them could give a satisfactory answer. Everything was hazy, unclear, as if they were stuck in an eternal moment with no way out. The passengers, who had been eager to fly, now stood there, staring at the black screens, unable to understand what was happening. The chaos was not only about technology, but also the feeling of chaos in everyone's mind. Everyone wanted to find an explanation, but no one could give a precise answer. Unanswered questions formed in the air, and then the endless waiting continued. At that moment, everything felt like a play without a script, where everyone could only look at each other, chuckle, but deep down, they felt uneasy. Time suddenly became blurred. The moment seemed to last forever. The whole airport seemed to be plunged into absolute silence, and then something big was approaching, and everyone could only wait. No one was sure what would happen next. Suddenly, in the midst of the silence, a man appeared, walking quickly from the end of the airport corridor. He was dressed in a black suit, tall, calm but hasty, his eyes shining with determination. It was Richard, the technical director of SkyGlobe Airlines, who had not been present in the confused crowd waiting, but now he suddenly appeared, quickly approaching Gate 37B, where Elise was being provocatively detained. When he saw Elise, his face paled. Panic flashed across his eyes, too quick to hide. Richard had been through many stressful situations in his career, but the scene before him was clearly beyond anything he had ever expected. Elise Brooks, a sharp and strong woman he had never expected to see in such a situation, was being ruthlessly held back. Elise said nothing, her eyes cold and empty as she stared straight at Richard. A look, sharp but restrained, like a silent warning without having to say a word. From that look, Richard realized, not only was there a grievance with Kara, but something bigger was waiting for him, and SkyGlobe Airlines. Before he could fully comprehend the situation, Richard immediately signaled to the surrounding staff. "Let her go, now!" His voice rang out, sharp and resolute, leaving no room for objection. Each word was an undeniable command, and the staff there immediately stopped, not knowing what to do but stand still, stunned. They had not yet understood what was happening, had not yet realized that the woman they had just treated with coldness and contempt was not an ordinary passenger. All eyes were now on Elise. In the silence, a whisper rose from a nearby passenger. "Who is she?" It was a question not only from that person but from everyone who witnessed this event, who now began to realize that something was very wrong with the way Elise had been treated. Elise stood there, still strangely calm, her eyes turned towards Kara and all the witnesses. In a low but firm voice she spoke softly. "Miss Kara, this airline belongs to me, and today you taught it a valuable lesson." Elise's words were like a shock. Everyone around, including the passenger standing nearby, was stunned. No one said anything. No one dared to utter a word. Only silence remained as a resolute affirmation from her. Elise was not just an ordinary passenger, she was the owner of SkyGlobe, one of the largest airlines in the country. And now, she had proven to everyone that arrogance and discrimination could not exist, could not be tolerated, no matter who, no matter how powerful. Shock, confusion, and finally awe filled the air. No one dared to move, no one dared to say anything, but looked at each other and gradually realized that they had witnessed an unforgettable moment. A lesson in power, fairness, and respect. A lesson that had profound value not only in the world of aviation, but in society at large. Less than an hour after Elise stepped out of the airport, the entire SkyGlobe airline was grounded. The grounding order was issued immediately by the authorities, and flights from expensive business class to economy class were delayed. Never before had an event been so disruptive. Planes stopped taking off, airport staff stood frozen, staring at electronic screens where the grounding message kept flashing. The entire system was spiraling out of control, and SkyGlobe, once a symbol of reliability and class in the airline industry, was now the focus of relentless criticism. For the next 48 hours, the media relentlessly covered, analyzed, and commented on the incident. Reporters from all over flocked to the scene, cameras rolling non-stop, capturing every image, every moment. Loudspeakers, sensational articles, heated debates about racism, power, and injustice, all centered on a single woman, Elise Brooks. The image of her being dragged out of the gate, her face cold and determined, became the unofficial symbol of the fight against discrimination and injustice. Despite all the attention focused on her, Elise chose to remain silent. She refused to answer any calls from the press, not a single comment, not a single public statement. But there was one thing Elise could not stop. The video of people witnessing her being denied boarding. The video quickly spread on social media, reaching every corner of cyberspace. No matter how silent she was, these clips were enough to tell the story. Social media users, from ordinary people to big influencers, shared and commented endlessly. Every comment, every hashtag discussing the behavior of airline staff, about power, about racism, all became part of the global conversation. The online community continuously expressed sympathy for Elise. They called her a hero, a symbol of courage in a world where human values can sometimes be overlooked. No one could have imagined that what seemed like a small incident in the aviation industry would have such a strong impact. And while SkyGlobe struggled with reactions from customers and accusations from social organizations, Elise remained steadfast in her decision. She did not need to speak up. She taught everyone a lesson that not only SkyGlobe, but the whole world needed to remember. 3 months later, as the dust settled, big changes began to take shape. The American airline system, long thought to be unshakable, began to bow to the wave of change that Elise had inadvertently unleashed. The U.S. Department of Transportation, with pressure from civil rights groups and the public, issued a formal notice requiring all airlines to report all incidents of racial discrimination, from denial of service to violations of passenger rights. This was more than a requirement. It was a turning point in how the industry viewed fairness and human rights. A reform strategy called Serve Fairly was launched by the Air Transport Association of America. This program would certify airlines that could demonstrate that they had implemented measures to eliminate racial discrimination in all aspects of their service. Airlines would need this certification if they wanted to maintain credibility with the public and their customers. The demands on the airline industry had never been so stringent, and Elise, though she no longer spoke to the press, could clearly feel the changes taking effect. She was not just a victim in this story. She had become the catalyst for a quiet, powerful, but necessary revolution. Not stopping there, airlines quickly signed a commitment to retraining their staff to raise awareness of racism. They understood that an employee not only needed to have job skills, but also had to be sensitive to social issues, stories that not everyone could easily see. Workshops and training programs began to be implemented to help all employees, from those standing at check-in counters to flight attendants and pilots, to be able to face all situations fairly and humanely. Elise did not need to say more because everything was said for her in these measures. Another notable change is the change in insurance policies. Insurance companies, which have long been reluctant to intervene in social issues, have begun to reduce premiums for airlines that have fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory policies. These, while not immediately recognized, are solid steps for the aviation industry to move forward with a new, completely different look than before. Each of these decisions, each of these policy changes, is the result of silent struggles, stories like Elise's that have shaken up not only the aviation industry, but have also created a wave of reform in all other sectors. Elise may not have been the only one to fight this battle, but she helped pave the way for those who came after her, those who refused to bow to injustice. And in all of this, a clear message has been sent. Justice is not just a concept, but a right that everyone deserves. Mark was no longer an airport security guard. After an event that he never thought would change his life, he asked for a transfer. It was not an easy decision, but it was also undeniable. He wanted a different role, where not only he, but also the colleagues around him, could learn and change. And so, Mark became a cross-cultural communication trainer for new employees at SkyGlobe. On his first day in his new role, Mark stood before a class full of curious eyes, not eyes of doubt, but eyes of anticipation. Eagerness from young people, new to the profession. He looked at them, then looked down at his hand, where his trembling fingers had once held Elise's hand. The girl who he would later realize had changed not only his life, but also the way he viewed values he had never understood. In a deep, experienced voice, he began his story. I once dragged a woman out of the gate and spent 3 sleepless nights afterwards. The class fell silent. The new students, with their neat uniforms and innocent looks, could not imagine that the man standing before them that day had been part of a situation that was now a haunting story full of bitter lessons. Mark didn't stop there. He continued, sentence by sentence, word by word, as if he wanted to open up everything that had been buried in his heart. She was just a normal passenger, a woman, but I don't understand why at that time I treated her like that. I didn't think about her feelings, only thought about work, thought about the mission. But now, every time I stand before these new employees, I remember that image, the image of her being dragged away without an explanation. The image of her standing still, not resisting, but she definitely felt the humiliation deep inside. And I was the one who created it. He paused for a moment, as if to let his words sink in. We can't forget that every action, no matter how small, can have a bigger impact than we think. And I've learned that respect, empathy, is the most important element in this job. Always remember, not everyone has the opportunity to be treated fairly. But we can be the ones to change that. The class was no longer filled with curious eyes, but now all of them were filled with thoughtful eyes, as if for the first time they truly realized the importance of things that seemed invisible but could change a life. Mark saw the change in their eyes, feeling like he was planting a seed of fairness and respect in each person's heart. He knew that his story had not only helped him change, but could also change the next generations in the aviation industry. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't just a lesson. It was a journey, a learning process that he and those around him would never forget. Mark smiled, not because he was happy, but because he understood that sometimes the biggest mistakes are the most profound lessons. And in Elise's story, he didn't just see a woman who had been hurt. He saw the need for change, the need to create a more just world. A world where he and all of us could live together with respect. Everything has changed. The flight from Gate 37B, where Elise once faced discrimination and hurt, now carries with it a new beginning, a symbol of profound change in the hearts of every person. The entire Gate 37B area has been completely renovated. The old name, where injustice once took place, has been removed, as if to erase the painful memories that no one wants to mention anymore. In its place, a new board has been erected, covered with fresh green fabric, clearly writing 3 meaningful and hopeful words. Coming soon, a new way to fly. A message not only for passengers, but also a reminder to all those working in the aviation industry of a new approach, a new way of flying, where respect and fairness are paramount. The entire area of Gate 37B is now not only a place for flights to depart, but also a place to celebrate the harmony between different cultures. A prayer room has been built, where any passenger can find a quiet space to reflect, pray, or simply be quiet for a moment of peace before embarking on a new journey. Multilingual signs are posted everywhere, showing respect for all languages, and multicultural artworks are displayed, showing the richness and diversity of the world. This is not just a physical renovation, but a spiritual rebirth, a new mindset that we all have to live in together. SkyGlobe, the once suspended airline, is back in business after 6 months, but it is not the same SkyGlobe it once was. It has been rebuilt, not just physically, but ethically and with leadership. A new leadership team that understands that innovation comes not just from improving service, but from a commitment to fairness and respect. A leadership team that doesn't see customers as numbers, but understands that each passenger has a story, a unique value. And the first flight the airline flew back was from New York to Singapore, a flight that was more than just a point-to-point trip. It was a flight that for the first time in history was operated by a female Latina pilot and an Asian flight attendant, each with their own unique stories and experiences. They represented a radical change, a new way that SkyGlobe was not just an airline, but a symbol of inclusion and diversity. With this flight, SkyGlobe doesn't just take passengers to a destination. It takes them to new concepts of fairness, respect, and inclusion. It takes them to a world where everyone can fly, not just because they have money, but because they deserve to be treated fairly, like everyone else. And Elise, the woman who was once dragged away from the boarding gate, is no longer a mere name. She is a symbol of a fight for change, for a society where no one should be silent, no one should stand alone. Her story changed a system, touched the hearts of those who work in the airline industry and those who fly, reminding them of something simple but incredibly important. We all deserve to be treated with respect and fairness. This story did not begin with a great battle, nor with a powerful organization, nor with a widespread movement. It began with one woman, one individual, who refused to accept being seen as not belonging, not being accepted in a world full of prejudice and discrimination. Elise stood up to injustice, not because she wanted to fight for herself, but because she knew that this fight was not just for her, but for everyone like her, and everyone who has ever felt overlooked, undervalued. Thanks to Elise's courage, the entire airline industry stopped and took a hard look at itself. They could no longer ignore discriminatory behavior, could no longer continue to treat customers, employees, as inanimate objects. Profound changes began, not only within the airlines themselves, but also in the hearts of those in the industry, who realized that respect and justice must come first. And all of these changes, all of these awakenings, started with a woman who could stand alone, but was strong enough to make the entire system reflect. If this story has touched your heart, if you feel the power of resilience, of justice and respect for every human being, please like, share, and leave the keyword justice in the comment section. Let this story spread, not only to remember a war that has been won, but to continue spreading the message of a more just world, where each of us can fly, not only with wings, but with freedom and equality.